Hey everyone, welcome back to another round of digital chaos set against the soothing backdrop of Minecraft gameplay. Today we're diving into stories that prove the universe has a dark sense of humor and impeccable timing. Before we get started, I just want to give a quick shout out to everyone who's been showing up, commenting, and supporting the channel. Seriously, thank you. It helps more than you know. So grab your headphones, get comfortable, and let's start with a story that begins with the worst possible text message you could ever send. I'd been suspicious for weeks. You know that gut feeling that something's off? The one you try to ignore because acknowledging it means your whole relationship might be a lie? Yeah, I had that. My boyfriend had started working late more often. His texts got shorter and colder, and every time I asked about his day, he'd give me these vague non-answers that felt rehearsed. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But the excuses were piling up faster than I could rationalize them away. Then one night, he left his laptop open. I wasn't snooping, not intentionally anyway. I walked past his desk and the screen was just sitting there, messages pulled up. My eyes caught a name, Jay, and the preview of the last message made my stomach drop. It was flirty, really flirty. The kind of message you don't send to a coworker or a buddy. I stood there for a second, frozen, debating whether I wanted to know the truth. Spoiler alert, I did. I sat down and scrolled, and kept scrolling. Weeks of messages, compliments, inside jokes, plans to meet up. My hands were shaking. There were messages about how he wished things were different, how he hated sneaking around, how he couldn't wait to see Jay again. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. Every late night, every cancelled plan, every time he said he was too tired to talk, it all made sense now. He wasn't tired. He was busy texting someone else. I didn't confront him right away. I know, but I needed proof. Something concrete. So I screenshotted everything. Every message, every flirty emoji, every lie. I saved it all to my phone, my hands still trembling with this mix of rage and heartbreak. I needed to talk to someone before I exploded. I needed to vent to my best friend Jamie, the one person who'd tell me I wasn't crazy and help me figure out what to do next. So I opened my texts, found Jamie's name, and fired off the screenshots with a message that was basically a string of angry emojis and the words, "Look at this garbage." I hit send, and then I looked at the screen, really looked at it, and my entire body went cold. I didn't text Jamie. I texted Janet, his mum, same first letter, right under each other in my contacts. Autofill had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I sat there staring at my phone like it had just grown teeth. 3 seconds. That's how long it took for the pure horror to set in. I'd just sent explicit proof of her son cheating to his mother, screenshots of him being unfaithful. Messages that proved he was a liar. I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or throw my phone into the ocean. Probably all three. My phone exploded. And I mean exploded. Within 30 seconds, Janet was calling me. My screen lit up with her name, and I genuinely considered not answering, faking my own death, and moving to another country. But I picked up because what else was I going to do? If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. Now, back to the fallout. Her voice was shaking when she answered. Not angry shaking, sad shaking. She said my name, quiet and careful, and then she said, "Thank you. Thank you." I was not expecting that. She told me she'd suspected something was going on for a while now. He'd been acting strange, distant, always on his phone. And here's where it gets worse. She'd been seeing charges on the family credit card. Hotel charges, multiple times, all local. He'd told her it was work events, conferences, networking dinners. She'd wanted to believe him, just like I had. But now she had proof. Proof she didn't ask for but needed. She thanked me again, her voice steadier now, and told me she was confronting him that night. She said I deserved better, that she was sorry. Then she hung up. I sat there holding my phone, still processing what just happened, wondering if I'd just accidentally started a family civil war. I didn't have to wait long to find out. 2 hours later, there was pounding on my door. Aggressive, frantic pounding. I looked through the peephole and there he was. My boyfriend. Ex-boyfriend, I guess. His eyes were red, his hair was a mess, and he looked like he'd been crying for the entire drive over. I opened the door and he practically fell inside, words spilling out in this desperate, panicked rush. His mum had kicked him out, cut him off financially, told him he was a disappointment and a liar. He was crying, actually crying, saying it was all a misunderstanding, that the messages didn't mean what I thought they meant, that Jay was just a friend and he was venting and it got out of hand. The excuses were so pathetic I almost felt embarrassed for him. Almost. He begged. He actually got on his knees and begged me for another chance. Said he'd do anything. Said he loved me. Said he made a mistake. Said his mom overreacted and now he had nowhere to go and no access to money and it was all falling apart. He looked at me like I was supposed to feel sorry for him, like I was supposed to save him from the consequences of his own actions. I let him finish, let him get it all out. Then I looked him dead in the eye and told him to ask Jay for a couch to sleep on. His face went white. He started to say something, but I shut the door, locked it, blocked his number, blocked him on every platform I could think of. Instagram, Snapchat, everything. I even blocked Jay just for good measure. The angry texts started coming through on my laptop before I remembered to log out of iMessage there too. He called me heartless, said I ruined his life, said I went too far, that texting his mum was vindictive and cruel. I didn't respond. I just logged out, poured myself a very large glass of wine, and let the whole thing wash over me. Here's the thing. I didn't mean to text his mum. It was a complete accident. But honestly, best accident I ever made, because she deserved to know. She'd been paying for hotel rooms where her son was cheating on his girlfriend. She'd been lied to just like I had. And if I hadn't sent those screenshots, we both would have kept believing his excuses, kept letting him get away with it. Janet texted me a few days later, just a simple message saying she hoped I was okay and that she was sorry I got caught up in their family mess. I told her I was fine and that she didn't need to apologize for his behavior. We're not best friends now or anything, but there's this weird mutual respect. We both saw through the same lies. We both refused to be fooled anymore. As for him, last I heard he moved in with Jay. Turns out Jay was very real, very available, and very willing to take in a suddenly homeless cheater. They're welcome to each other. I'm just over here living my best life, double-checking contact names before I hit send, and not dating liars. Sometimes the universe works in mysterious ways, and sometimes it works through autocomplete and a poorly organized contact list. Either way, I'm calling it a win. But texting the wrong person isn't always an accident. Sometimes it's karma's way of exposing something even worse, like what happened when someone realized their partner's roommate situation was a complete lie. My boyfriend Mark and I had been together for about 6 months when I decided I wanted to do something sweet for him. We'd been getting pretty serious, talking about future plans, meeting each other's friends, the whole thing. He'd mentioned a few times that mornings were rough for him because he always skipped breakfast before work, so I figured I'd surprise him one weekend with homemade pancakes and coffee. You know, the kind of adorable girlfriend move you see in movies that always works out perfectly. Spoiler alert, this was not going to be one of those moments. Mark had given me a spare key to his place a few weeks earlier, which felt like a big step. He lived about 20 minutes across town in what he described as a pretty standard 2-bedroom apartment that he split with his roommate Alex. He'd mentioned Alex a handful of times, always casually, always in the context of rent and bills and whose turn it was to buy toilet paper. Normal roommate stuff. I'd never met Alex because, according to Mark, their schedules never really overlapped. Alex worked nights, Mark worked days. They were like ships passing in the apartment. It all seemed completely reasonable, and I had absolutely zero reason to question any of it. So that Saturday morning, I stopped by the grocery store, grabbed everything I needed for breakfast, and drove over to his place. I was actually pretty excited about it. I had this whole plan in my head where I'd quietly let myself in, start cooking, and he'd wake up to the smell of coffee and bacon. Cute, right? I even bought those fancy chocolate chips for the pancakes because he'd mentioned once that he loved them as a kid. I got to his building around 8 in the morning, let myself in through the main door, and headed up to his floor. When I unlocked his apartment door and stepped inside, the first thing I noticed was how weirdly pristine everything was. The living room looked like a furniture showroom, couch perfectly arranged, throw pillows positioned at exact angles, not a single item out of place, no shoes by the door, no mail on the counter, no coffee mugs in the sink. It was almost unsettling how clean it was, like nobody actually lived there. I remember thinking it was strange, but I figured maybe Mark had just done a deep clean recently or something. I set the grocery bags down on the kitchen counter as quietly as I could and glanced around. The apartment was small, smaller than I'd pictured based on how he'd described it. The kitchen opened into the living room, and from where I stood, I could see a short hallway with exactly two doors. One was clearly the bathroom because the door was partially open, and I could see tile. The other was closed. That was it. Two doors, total. And here's where my brain started doing math it didn't want to do. He'd said it was a two-bedroom apartment, but I was standing in an apartment that very clearly only had one bedroom. Unless the second bedroom was hidden behind the bathroom or existed in some kind of alternate dimension, the layout didn't match what he'd told me at all. I stood there for a second, grocery bag still in hand, trying to logic my way through it. Maybe I misheard him. Maybe he said one bedroom and I assumed two. Maybe the second bedroom was being used for storage or something and didn't have a real door. I was grasping at explanations because the alternative, the one my gut was starting to whisper, was too weird to accept, but curiosity got the better of me. I put the bags down and walked quietly toward the closed bedroom door. I wasn't trying to snoop. Exactly. I just needed to see the space, to confirm that I was overreacting and that there was a perfectly logical explanation for why this supposedly two-bedroom apartment only seemed to have one actual bedroom. I turned the handle slowly, pushed the door open, and everything I thought I knew about my relationship disintegrated in about 3 seconds. Mark was in bed, and so was someone else. They were spooning, full on, arms wrapped around each other, faces peaceful in sleep spooning. The kind of intimate, comfortable position you don't just accidentally end up in. I stood there in the doorway, frozen, my brain refusing to process what my eyes were very clearly seeing. That's when Mark's eyes opened. He saw me. And the look on his face went from groggy confusion to wide-eyed panic so fast it would have been funny if I wasn't currently experiencing emotional whiplash. He shot up in bed, scrambling, nearly kicking the other person in the process, and immediately started stammering. "It's not what it looks like," he said, which is universally the first thing every guilty person says when it is absolutely 100% exactly what it looks like. "I can explain. We're not, it's just..." But that wasn't even the worst part. The other person, who I'd assumed based on the back of their head and the situation was some random girl he'd been cheating with, rolled over slowly, blinked at me with zero urgency, and mumbled two words that made everything so much worse. "Again," she said. Just that. Again. Like this was a recurring episode of a show she was tired of watching. That's when I got a full look at her face. This was Alex, his roommate Alex, who he had somehow, in 6 months of dating, never once mentioned was a woman. Not a single time. Every story, every casual reference, every excuse for why I'd never met this person had been carefully phrased to make me assume Alex was a guy. And now Alex, a fully awake woman who clearly had no problem sharing a bed with my boyfriend, was looking at me like I was the fourth person to walk in on this exact scene. Because, as it turned out, I was. The whole story came out in the most humiliating 15 minutes of my life. Alex sat up, rubbed her eyes, and just started talking. No filter, no sugarcoating, nothing. She explained that she and Mark had dated for 3 years. 3 years. They'd broken up about 8 months ago, right before I met him, but had decided to keep living together because breaking a lease was expensive and apartments were hard to find. Fine. Weird, but technically fine. Except they'd kept sharing a bed, because according to Alex, the apartment only had one bedroom, not two. One. Mark had been lying about that from day one. They'd agreed to keep things platonic, just roommates saving money. But they never bothered getting a second bed or a couch that converted, or literally any solution that didn't involve two exes sleeping inches apart every single night. Alex said she'd told him it was a bad idea, that it would be confusing for anyone he dated, that eventually someone was going to find out, and it was going to be a disaster, and apparently I wasn't the first person to discover this setup. I was the fourth girl he'd tried to date while still platonically, but let's be honest, not actually platonically, sharing a bed with his ex-girlfriend. The first three had all walked away the second they found out. I was just the first one dumb enough to get a spare key and show up unannounced. Mark, to his credit, looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. He kept trying to jump in, to defend himself, to explain that it really was innocent and they really were just saving money, and it wasn't weird because they'd been together so long that it didn't feel romantic anymore. Which, if you think about it for more than 2 seconds, is an absolutely unhinged thing to say to your current girlfriend while you're still in bed with your ex. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I didn't even argue. I just stood there, looked at both of them, and realized there was nothing left to say. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't something we could talk through. This was a deliberate pattern of lying, and I was just the latest person to get caught in it. I turned around, walked back to the kitchen, set the spare key on the counter next to the pancake ingredients I'd bought like an idiot, and left. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't slam the door. I just left. Mark tried calling me about 30 times that day, texted even more, long paragraphs about how it wasn't what I thought, how he cared about me, how Alex meant nothing to him anymore, how he'd move out and get his own place if that's what it took. But here's the thing, if he'd actually cared, he would have done that before he started dating me, before he started dating anyone. He'd had 4 chances to figure this out, and he'd chosen the lie every single time. I blocked his number, blocked him on everything actually, and I never looked back. Alex sent me a message a few days later, just a short one. She said she was sorry that she'd told him this would happen and that she hoped I was okay. I didn't respond, but part of me appreciated it. At least one person in that apartment had a grip on reality. Looking back, the wildest part isn't even that he lied, it's that he thought he could keep getting away with it. 4 different women. 4. At some point you think the pattern would click. But no, some people really do just choose chaos and hope nobody notices. Speaking of people living double lives, wait until you hear about the girlfriend who claimed she was too sick to see her boyfriend, then accidentally went viral on a cruise ship. Emma told me she had the flu. Not just a little under the weather, full-on bedridden can't move fever situation. Our 1-year anniversary was that weekend, and we'd had reservations at this beautiful lakeside resort for months. I was crushed when she called to cancel, voice all raspy and weak, saying she could barely get out of bed and didn't want to get me sick. She sounded miserable. I felt terrible for her, so I did what any good boyfriend would do. I ordered her favorite soup from that Thai place she loves, sent flowers with a get well soon card, texted her every few hours to check in. She'd respond with short messages about how awful she felt, how she was just sleeping constantly, how she'd never been this sick in her life. I told her not to worry about anything, that we could reschedule, that her health was what mattered. I even offered to come over and take care of her, but she said no. She didn't want me catching whatever she had. Made sense. I respected that boundary. 3 days into her supposed illness, I was lying on my couch, scrolling through TikTok, just mindlessly watching whatever the algorithm threw at me. Minecraft builds, cooking videos, the usual. Then a live stream popped up. Some cruise ship content creator doing a pool deck tour. I almost scrolled past it, but something caught my eye. The camera panned across the pool, and there was Emma. Not kind of looked like Emma. Not someone who resembled Emma. It was 100% unmistakably, undeniably Emma. Same pink bikini I'd seen on her Instagram from last summer. Same sunglasses. Same laugh I could hear even through the chaotic audio of the live stream. Same girlfriend who was supposedly dying of flu in her apartment, with 102-degree fever. I sat up so fast I almost dropped my phone. My hands started shaking. I took a screenshot, then another, then screen recorded the next 30 seconds just to make sure I had proof. She was holding a tropical drink with a little umbrella in it. She was tanned. She was laughing with a group of people I vaguely recognized from her work holiday party photos. She looked like she was having the time of her life. She definitely did not look like someone who'd been bedridden for 72 hours. The rage that hit me was something else entirely. Not just anger, betrayal, humiliation. The realization that while I'd been worried sick about her, sending care packages and being the supportive boyfriend, she'd been on a cruise ship living her best life. But that wasn't even the worst part. I started piecing it together. This wasn't some last-minute trip. You don't just hop on a cruise with 3 days' notice. She'd planned this. She'd known about it. and she deliberately lied to me to avoid taking me with her. I called her immediately. It went to voicemail. Of course it did. She was probably in airplane mode or had service turned off to avoid roaming charges. I texted her. Nothing. I was sitting there staring at my phone, at the screenshots, at the evidence of her lie, trying to figure out what to do. Then I had an idea. Maybe not my most mature moment, but I was running on pure adrenaline and anger at this point. I went back to the TikTok live stream. It was still going. I commented, "Hope you feel better soon, Emma!" Exclamation point, and I attached the screenshot. Just that, no long explanation, no essay about what a liar she was, just a simple, passive-aggressive little comment with proof. Then I watched. The comment got a few likes, then more. Then someone replied asking if that was my girlfriend. Then someone else recognized her from the live stream and tagged the cruise line. Within an hour, the comment had hundreds of likes. Within 2 hours, the TikTok itself started going viral. People were stitching it, duetting it, making reaction videos. The internet does what the internet does best. It found the drama and it ran with it. Here's where it gets absurd. Emma's co-workers saw it. Because of course they did. They were on the cruise with her. One of them sent it to their group chat. Then someone sent it to their boss. Her boss. The one she'd told she was too sick to come into work that week. The one she'd used 3 days of paid time off for her supposed flu. Turns out her boss was not thrilled to discover his employee had lied about being sick to go party on a cruise ship, especially when the evidence was going viral on social media with their company name tagged in half the comments. Emma called me 4 days later, and not from the cruise, she was back by then. She was furious, absolutely livid, screaming at me about how I'd ruined her life, how I was vindictive and petty, how I'd gotten her fired. Yes, fired. Her boss had terminated her employment for dishonesty and misuse of sick leave. She'd also lost all her accumulated PTO in the process, which apparently was like 3 weeks' worth that she'd been saving up. The company had a zero-tolerance policy for this kind of thing, and the viral TikTok made it impossible to sweep under the rug. She kept saying I should have just talked to her, that I'd overreacted, that it wasn't that big a deal. She'd won the cruise through work months ago, she said. It was a reward thing for hitting sales goals, and she hadn't wanted to waste it on our anniversary weekend because, and I quote, she didn't think I'd enjoy a cruise and didn't want to deal with me complaining the whole time. So her solution was to lie about having the flu, go with her co-workers instead, and just hope I never found out. The audacity was genuinely impressive. She'd calculated that she could pull this off, that I'd just accept her excuse, that social media wouldn't betray her, that none of her co-workers would slip up. She'd been so confident in her ability to deceive me that she hadn't even considered a backup plan. I let her finish her rant. I let her call me every name in the book. Then I said 3 words. We are done. She tried to backtrack then, saying she'd made a mistake, that she was sorry, that we could work through this. I told her the only mistake was me wasting a year on someone who valued a free cruise with co-workers over being honest with their partner. I told her I'd already packed up the few things she'd left at my apartment and she could pick them up from my building's front desk. She showed up the next day, still trying to convince me to give her another chance. She'd already applied to new jobs, she said. She'd learned her lesson. She'd never lie to me again. I just looked at her and said that the problem wasn't just the lie. It was that when she'd won that cruise, when she'd had months to tell me about it, her first instinct wasn't to invite me or even just be honest about wanting to go with friends. Her first instinct was to scheme about how to exclude me without me finding out. That told me everything I needed to know about how she saw our relationship. The last thing she said to me was that I was vindictive for posting that comment, that I'd destroyed her career over a stupid mistake. I corrected her. I told her she'd destroyed her own career by lying to her employer and posting about it on social media. I just made sure the truth got out. Then I closed the door. Honestly, they basically built their own downfall. All the pieces were there. The lie, the social media posts, the co-workers who could verify everything. I just connected the dots in a very public way. Some people said I went too far. That commenting on that live stream was petty. Maybe it was. But you know what's also petty? Faking the flu to ditch your anniversary plans because you don't think your partner is fun enough for your free cruise. Last I heard through mutual friends, she's still job hunting and had to move back in with her parents. The TikTok still pops up sometimes in those compilation videos about people getting caught in lies. I don't feel bad about it, not even a little bit. Lies about sickness are bad, but at least that relationship was still just dating. Imagine discovering your fiance's best man had a secret that threatened everything. I was engaged to David, the love of my life, and we were in full wedding planning mode. You know that phase where everything feels magical and overwhelming at the same time. Venue booked, caterer chosen, guest list nearly finalized. We'd been together for 3 years, and honestly, I thought I had it all figured out. David's best friend since childhood, Greg, had agreed to be the best man, and he'd been incredible throughout the whole process. Helpful, enthusiastic, always offering to run errands or help coordinate with vendors. Looking back now, I should have noticed how eager he was to be involved in every single detail. Greg would text me about centerpiece options when David was at work. He'd offer to pick up cake samples on his lunch break. He even helped me assemble those little DIY wedding favors one afternoon, while David was stuck in a meeting. At the time, I just thought he was being a really supportive friend. David had mentioned that Greg didn't have many close relationships outside their friendship, so I figured he was just excited to be part of something special. I genuinely appreciated the help. Planning a wedding is exhausting, and having an extra set of hands felt like a blessing. Then, one Thursday night, everything shifted in the most uncomfortable way imaginable. David was out of town for a work conference, gone for 3 days. Greg texted me asking if he could swing by to drop off some wedding programs he'd picked up from the printer as a favor. I said sure, told him to come by around 7. When he arrived, I opened the door expecting a quick handoff. He was holding the box of programs, smiling, looking completely normal. I thanked him, took the box, and started to say goodbye. But he didn't leave. Instead, he asked if he could come in for a minute. Said he wanted to talk about something important regarding the bachelor party plans. I hesitated for half a second, but then figured it was fine. We'd hung out plenty of times, always with David around, but it didn't seem weird. He was practically family. So I let him in, set the box down on the coffee table, and offered him something to drink. He declined, just sat down on my couch and went completely silent for what felt like forever. I sat across from him in the armchair, confused, waiting for him to say whatever he needed to say about the bachelor party. The energy in the room felt strange, heavy. He kept looking at his hands, then at me, then back at his hands. Finally, he spoke, and what came out of his mouth made my entire body go cold. He told me he'd been in love with me since the first day we met, that every time he saw me with David, it killed him. That David didn't appreciate me the way he would, didn't see me the way he did. He said he'd tried to push the feelings down, tried to be happy for his best friend, but he couldn't do it anymore. He said he should have asked me out first, that if he'd met me before David did, we'd be the ones getting married. I sat there frozen, genuinely unable to process what was happening. This was David's best friend, his childhood best friend, the guy who was supposed to stand beside him at our wedding in 8 weeks. And he was sitting in my living room confessing feelings I never asked for and definitely didn't return. I started to say something, to tell him this was wildly inappropriate and he needed to leave. But before I could get the words out, he stood up. And then he got down on one knee. I wish I was exaggerating. He actually got on one knee, right there in my living room, and pulled a ring box out of his jacket pocket. A real ring. Not some placeholder or joke. An actual engagement ring. He opened the box, looked up at me with this intense, desperate expression, and said he could give me a better life than David ever could. That I deserved someone who truly worshipped me. That if I just gave him a chance, I'd see we were meant to be together. You almost have to admire the audacity. I finally found my voice and told him to get out. Not loudly, not dramatically, just firmly. I said he needed to leave my apartment immediately and that this was completely unacceptable. He didn't move at first. He stayed on one knee, ring box open, looking at me like he was waiting for me to change my mind, like I was supposed to have some sudden realization that he was right. When I stood up and walked toward the door, he finally got the message. He stood, closed the ring box, and put it back in his pocket. He tried to say something else, some kind of explanation or plea, but I cut him off, told him to leave and not contact me again. The second he was out the door, I locked it and immediately called David. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. When he answered, I tried to explain what had just happened, but it came out in this frantic, disjointed rush. David's first reaction wasn't anger, it was disbelief. He actually laughed a little, like I had to be joking or exaggerating. He said there was no way Greg would do something like that. They'd been best friends since they were 7 years old. Greg was the most loyal person he knew. He asked if maybe I'd misunderstood, if maybe Greg was just trying to be funny, or test some weird best man speech idea. That's when everything unraveled. I told David I had proof. My apartment building had a video doorbell, one of those smart ones that records everything. I pulled up the app on my phone while we were still on the call and started scrubbing through the footage from that evening. And there it was, crystal clear. Greg getting down on one knee in full view of the hallway camera before I let him inside, practicing. He'd actually practiced the proposal outside my door before knocking. Then the footage of him leaving 20 minutes later, looking dejected, still holding that ring box. I sent the video to David. There was this long, terrible silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard him exhale, and his whole tone changed. He said he'd call me back and hung up. For the next hour, I sat on my couch, still in shock, waiting. I didn't know what to expect. Part of me worried David would somehow still try to rationalize it, convince himself Greg had just made a stupid mistake. But when David finally called back, his voice was different, flat, angry, hurt. He'd confronted Greg, called him immediately after watching the video, demanded an explanation, and Greg admitted everything, didn't even try to deny it. Told David he'd been in love with me from the beginning, that he'd stayed quiet out of loyalty but couldn't hold it in anymore. Said he thought if he just told me how he felt, I'd realize David wasn't the right choice. David asked him how long he'd been planning this, and Greg said he'd bought the ring 2 months ago. 2 months, while actively helping us plan our wedding. The friendship ended that night, not in some dramatic blowout fight, but in a quiet, final way. David told Greg he never wanted to see or hear from him again, blocked his number, removed him from every wedding plan. Greg tried to reach out to me a few days later through a mutual acquaintance, sent some long apologetic message about how he'd misread signals and just wanted closure. I didn't respond. Didn't owe him anything. David and I moved forward with the wedding, but there was this shadow over everything now. The best man spot stayed empty. David asked his brother to step in, but it wasn't the same. We still got married. The day was beautiful. Everything went smoothly. And I meant every word of my vows. But there was this unspoken absence in the room. A friendship that had lasted over 2 decades, gone because someone couldn't handle their feelings like an adult. David didn't talk about Greg much after that, but I know it hurt him deeply. Losing a best friend and getting betrayed at the same time does something to you. The worst part? Greg sent a wedding gift, showed up at our house a week after we got back from our honeymoon. No card, no note, just an expensive set of kitchen knives we'd registered for. David threw them away without even opening the box, said he didn't want anything from someone who tried to destroy what we built. At least that chaos happened before the wedding. But some workplace secrets are so twisted, they make romantic drama look simple. Like finding out your husband's boss knows more about your marriage than you do. My husband James worked for a tech company downtown. Good job, great benefits, steady paycheck. We'd been married for 5 years and everything seemed normal. I mean, we had our issues like any couple, but nothing that raised red flags. I'd met his boss Linda exactly once at a company summer picnic 3 years ago. Nice woman, very professional. We'd exchanged pleasantries by the grill and that was it. So when my phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon and it was Linda, I was genuinely confused. I answered thinking maybe she was calling about a surprise party for James, or some company event spouses were invited to. The conversation started normal enough. She asked how I was doing, made small talk about the weather. Then her tone shifted. She asked, very carefully, why I was listed in the company directory as James's co-worker in accounting. I laughed. I actually laughed because I thought it was some kind of mistake or miscommunication. I told her I didn't work there. I'm a 4th grade teacher. I work at an elementary school across town. I've been there for 7 years. There was this long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. The kind of silence that makes your stomach drop even before you know why. Then Linda asked if I could come to the office. Today, as soon as possible. She said it would be better to discuss this in person and that it was important. The way she said important made my hands start shaking. I told my principal I had a family emergency and left work early. The drive to James' office felt like it took forever and no time at all. My brain was spinning, trying to figure out what could possibly be going on. Maybe it was identity theft. Maybe someone had stolen my information and was using it. That had to be it, right? James wouldn't do anything shady. We shared finances. We were partners. Linda met me in the lobby and walked me to a conference room. There was someone from HR there too, a guy named Patrick who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Linda slid a folder across the table to me. Inside were employment documents, my name, my social security number, a signature that looked like mine but wasn't quite right, job title listed as accounting specialist, hire date from 3 years ago. I felt like I was looking at documents from an alternate reality. Linda explained that the company had been conducting a routine audit of payroll and benefits. They'd found an irregularity. I was listed as a full-time employee in the accounting department. I had a salary. I had benefits. I had direct deposit set up to an account I'd never heard of. And according to their records, I'd been working there for 3 years. But here's where it gets absurd. I'd never set foot in that building except for that one summer picnic. I didn't work in accounting. I didn't work there at all. And yet somehow for 3 years, I'd been getting paid. James had claimed me as a dependent employee. He'd forged my signature on tax documents, on employment contracts, on everything. He'd set up a separate bank account in my name and had my fake salary direct deposited there. Every 2 weeks for 3 years, the company had been paying me a full accounting specialist salary, complete with benefits and retirement contributions. Patrick from HR pulled out more documents, W-2 forms with my name on them, tax returns I'd never filed. James had been filing separate tax returns for my fictional employment while we filed jointly for our actual lives. He'd created an entire fake financial identity for me within his company. I sat there staring at these papers and I couldn't make my brain accept what I was seeing. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't identity theft by some random criminal. This was my husband, the man I'd been sharing a bed with for 5 years, the man who kissed me goodbye every morning and asked about my day every night. Linda's voice pulled me back. She said the company had to terminate James's employment immediately. This wasn't just a policy violation. This was fraud, embezzlement. They were legally required to report it. She looked genuinely sorry for me, which somehow made it worse. I asked where the money went, all that salary he'd been collecting in my name for 3 years. We're talking about a significant amount of money. Linda pulled out bank statements. The account had been opened, deposits went in like clockwork, and then the money disappeared. Withdrawals, transfers, cash advances. The account currently had $216 in it. They handed over the rope and tied the knot themselves. I went home in a daze. James wasn't there yet. I sat at our kitchen table with all the documents Linda had given me copies of. I just stared at them, our kitchen, our table, our life. How much of it was real? How much had I been living in a fantasy while he orchestrated this whole other reality behind my back? When James walked in, he knew immediately. I don't know if Linda had called him or if he just saw it on my face, but he froze in the doorway. He started talking fast, making excuses, saying it wasn't what it looked like, that he'd meant to tell me, that he'd been planning to come clean. I asked him where the money was, all of it, 3 years of salary. He went quiet, then he admitted he'd been gambling. Online poker, sports betting, casino trips he'd told me were work conferences. He'd lost almost all of it. He said he'd had a problem, but he was getting better. He said he'd planned to pay it all back before anyone noticed. The audacity is genuinely breathtaking. I told him to leave. He tried to argue, tried to say we could work through this, that couples therapy could fix this. I told him the company was pressing charges, that I was filing for divorce, that if he didn't leave right then, I was calling the police myself. He left, packed a bag, and went to stay with his brother. The next few months were a nightmare of legal proceedings. The company filed criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. James faced multiple counts. His lawyer tried to negotiate, but the evidence was overwhelming. He'd created false documents, forged signatures, stolen money from his employer using my identity. There wasn't much to negotiate. The court mandated financial counseling as part of his sentence. I filed for divorce while he was still attending his first session. My lawyer said I had grounds for fraud in the marriage itself, that I could potentially sue him for damages. But honestly, I just wanted it over. I wanted him out of my life. I never saw a penny of that money. The court ordered restitution to the company, not to me. James had to pay back what he'd stolen, which he'd already gambled away, so he was drowning in debt and legal fees. Our joint assets got divided in the divorce. The house had to be sold. Our savings, which I'd thought were healthy, turned out to be mostly gone. He'd been siphoning money from our accounts too. I ended up moving into a small apartment across town, starting over at 32 years old. My friends couldn't believe it. My family was horrified. Everyone kept asking if I'd had any idea, any clue. I kept replaying our life together, looking for signs I'd missed. But the truth is, he'd been living a double life so seamlessly that there was nothing to see. He went to work, he came home, he was a good actor. The part that still gets me is how calculated it was. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. He'd planned it, set up accounts, forged documents, maintained the lie for years. Every morning when he kissed me goodbye, he was going to a job where I apparently also worked, where my name was on a door I'd never walked through, where colleagues probably wondered why I never showed up to meetings. Linda actually apologized to me later, said the company should have caught it sooner, that their audit systems should have flagged someone who never clocked in, never responded to emails, never attended a single meeting. I told her it wasn't her fault. She'd been the one to call me. She'd been the one to pull the thread that unraveled everything. James ended up with a criminal record, a mountain of debt, and a ruined reputation. Last I heard, he was working retail and living with his parents. The gambling addiction story came out during the trial. Apparently, he'd been in debt to some pretty serious people. That's why he'd started the whole scheme in the first place, desperate for money to cover his losses. Part of me wonders if he ever would have told me. If the audit hadn't caught him, would he have just kept going, kept collecting my fake salary and gambling it away while I taught fourth graders their multiplication tables, completely oblivious? I don't have an answer to that, and honestly, I don't want one anymore. The divorce finalized 8 months after Linda's phone call. I kept my maiden name. Started fresh. My principal at school was incredibly understanding through the whole thing. My students never knew. I'd come to work, teach fractions and state capitals, and pretend my life wasn't imploding outside those classroom walls. It's been 2 years now. I'm in a better place, better apartment, better therapist, better understanding of what red flags actually look like. I don't date much. Trust isn't something I hand out anymore. But I'm okay. I'm rebuilding. And every time I see someone's name in an employee directory, I think about how easy it was for him to make me exist in a place I'd never been. How simple it was to create a whole false reality with just some forged signatures and a banking app. Money can absolutely destroy relationships, but family drama, that's a whole different level of betrayal. Like when someone discovered their sister wasn't just copying them, she was stealing their entire life. I was 12 weeks pregnant and absolutely glowing. After 2 years of trying, countless negative tests, and more tears than I care to remember, I was finally going to be a mum. My husband and I had just gotten back from our first ultrasound appointment, and I was staring at those grainy black and white images like they were the Mona Lisa. I know everyone says this, but I swear I could already see features. The little bean shape that would eventually become our daughter. I was so excited I could barely sit still. Naturally, I wanted to share the news with my family. We'd been keeping it quiet until we hit the 12-week mark, just to be safe, but now it felt real, official. I posted the ultrasound photos in our family group chat with a bunch of heart emojis and the caption, "Baby girl arriving February." The response was immediate and overwhelming. My mom called crying happy tears. My dad sent approximately 17 exclamation points. My aunt started planning baby showers before I'd even put my phone down. And my sister Melissa, she sent a sweet message, told me she was so happy for me, said she couldn't wait to be an aunt. She even asked if she could take me shopping for baby clothes next weekend. I remember feeling this warm rush of gratitude because Melissa and I had always been close, and I was so glad she was excited. Everything felt perfect, like my whole life was finally clicking into place. 2 weeks went by, 2 blissful, normal weeks, where I started researching cribs and reading pregnancy books and trying not to throw up every morning. Then my cousin Ashley called me completely out of the blue on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at work, sitting at my desk, barely paying attention when I answered because I figured she was just calling to chat about baby stuff. But her first words were, so when were you going to tell me Melissa's pregnant too? I actually laughed. I thought she was joking. But Ashley wasn't laughing. She sounded genuinely confused, maybe even a little hurt that I hadn't mentioned it. She said Melissa had just posted on Facebook announcing her own pregnancy, with ultrasound photos. I told Ashley she must have been mistaken, that Melissa wasn't pregnant, that she would have told me if she was. Ashley went quiet for a second, then said, I'm looking at the post right now. She sent me a screenshot, and I swear my entire body went cold. There was my sister's smiling face in a selfie, holding up an ultrasound photo. My ultrasound photo. The same exact image I'd shared in the family chat. Same date stamp in the corner. Same measurements. Same everything. She'd even cropped it slightly differently and added one of those pregnancy announcement filters with little baby footprints around the border. The caption read, Surprise baby on the way. I'm going to be a mum, with a dozen hashtags. The post already had over 100 likes. Family members were commenting congratulations. Her friends were losing their minds in the comments. And there was my baby, my ultrasound, my private medical image, being used to fabricate my sister's fake pregnancy announcement. I didn't even think. I called her immediately. She answered on the third ring, sounding cheerful and bright, like nothing was wrong. I didn't bother with small talk. I asked her point blank why she was using my ultrasound photos to announce a pregnancy that didn't exist. The silence on the other end was deafening. Then she tried to laugh it off, said it was just a joke, that people would obviously know it wasn't real. I told her that no, actually, people didn't know, because our entire extended family was currently commenting, congratulations on her very public Facebook post. That's when her tone shifted. She got defensive, started making excuses, and then the truth came tumbling out in this panicked, rambling confession. She'd been dating this guy Kyle for about 3 months. Apparently, he'd tried to break up with her 2 weeks ago. Said things were moving too fast, that he wasn't ready for anything serious. Melissa panicked and told him she was pregnant. Just blurted it out. She said she figured she'd deal with the consequences later, but that for now, it kept him from leaving. Except then, Kyle started asking questions, wanted to go to doctor appointments, started talking about being there for the baby, and Melissa realized she needed proof. So she just took mine, like it was the most natural thing in the world, like my pregnancy was some kind of community resource she could borrow whenever convenient. She actually said the words, I figured you wouldn't mind. It's basically the same thing. We're sisters. I could barely process what I was hearing. I asked her if she understood how insane that was, how violated I felt, how she'd stolen something deeply personal and used it to manipulate her boyfriend. She started crying, saying she was going to come clean eventually, that she just needed a little more time, that Kyle was going to leave her if she told the truth now. I told her she had 2 hours to delete the post and tell Kyle the truth, or I would do it for her. She begged me not to, said I'd be ruining her relationship, that I didn't understand how much she loved him, that if I just gave her a few more weeks she could figure out how to break the news gently. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. But then I remembered that she'd taken one of the most important moments of my life and turned it into a prop for her manipulation scheme, and any sympathy I had evaporated instantly. This is where patience finally snapped. I reported the Facebook post for using my personal medical information without consent. I detailed exactly what she'd done in the report. Then I posted in the family group chat explaining the situation, showing the side-by-side comparison of my original ultrasound and her stolen version. I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't protect her. I just laid out the facts. My phone exploded. My mum called Melissa immediately. My aunts were horrified. My dad was furious in that quiet, disappointed way that's somehow worse than yelling. And apparently one of Melissa's friends saw the family chat drama unfold and told Kyle. Kyle called her within the hour. I don't know exactly what was said, but Melissa showed up at my apartment that night crying so hard she could barely breathe. He dumped her, told her she was manipulative and dishonest and that he wanted nothing to do with her. She stood in my doorway sobbing, mascara running down her face, and screamed at me that I'd ruined everything, that I could have just let her have this one thing, that it wasn't fair I got to be pregnant while her relationship fell apart. I stood there staring at her, and honestly, I didn't even recognize the person in front of me. This wasn't my sister. This was someone so desperate and selfish that she'd convinced herself stealing my pregnancy announcement was somehow acceptable. I told her to leave. She did, still crying, still blaming me for consequences that were entirely of her own making. My parents made her apologize a week later. It was stiff and forced and completely hollow. She mumbled sorry while staring at the floor, and I could tell she didn't mean a word of it. She still thought she was the victim, that I'd overreacted, that I should have just kept quiet and let her live her lie a little longer. We barely spoke for almost a year after that. Family gatherings were tense and awkward. She'd show up late, leave early, avoid making eye contact with me. My parents tried to smooth things over, tried to get us to work it out. But how do you work out someone violating your trust that fundamentally? How do you forgive someone who looked at your joy and saw only an opportunity to exploit it? Eventually things thawed, slightly. She sent me a baby gift when my daughter was born. We exchanged pleasantries at holidays, but it's not the same. It'll never be the same. There's always this wall between us now, built from broken trust and stolen ultrasounds and manipulative lies. And I learned a hard lesson about oversharing in family group chats. These days, I keep my personal updates minimal. Photos of my daughter, private albums, carefully curated audience, big life news, told individually to people I trust completely, because apparently even family isn't safe from people willing to weaponize your happiness for their own desperate schemes. Some people really will take anything that isn't nailed down, even if it's your unborn child's first photograph. Siblings can be toxic, but sometimes the cruelest revelations come from the people who raised you, especially when you find their hidden diary. My dad passed away last year. It wasn't sudden or dramatic, just the quiet kind of ending that comes after a long illness. We knew it was coming, had time to say goodbye, all of that. I thought I'd processed it, thought I understood who he was and what our relationship meant. I was wrong about a lot of things. A few months after the funeral, my mum asked me to help clean out his study. He'd been a psychologist, worked from home for most of my childhood, and that room was packed with decades of files, books, and research materials. She couldn't face it alone. I agreed because that's what you do. You show up, you help, you pretend sorting through a dead parent's belongings isn't completely gutting. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect. Client files that needed to be shredded, textbooks from grad school, framed degrees. But then I found the journals, leather-bound, expensive-looking, stacked neatly on a shelf behind his desk. There were maybe 15 of them, dating back 30 years. I'd never seen them before, never even knew he kept a journal. I was curious, I'll admit that. I thought maybe I'd find something comforting, some insight into who he was, maybe even some nice memories about me and my brother growing up. So I sat down on the floor of his study, pulled one off the shelf at random, and started reading. The first entry I landed on was dated from when I was 7. It was about me, about a punishment he'd given me for talking back. I remembered that day, actually. I'd been grounded for a week, no TV, no friends, nothing. It felt harsh at the time, but I figured that was just how he parented. Strict but fair, right? Except the journal entry wasn't written like a father reflecting on discipline. It was clinical, detached. He described the infraction, the punishment, and then noted my behavioral response over the following days. He'd recorded how I acted, what I said, how I seemed to internalize the consequence. Then he compared it to a previous entry about my brother, who'd done something similar around the same age but received a completely different response. A calm talk, encouragement, no punishment at all. I flipped to another entry, then another. My hands started shaking. Every entry was like that. Me and my brother, side by side, treated completely differently for the same behaviors. I got strict discipline, high expectations, constant criticism disguised as guidance. My brother got praise, freedom, gentle corrections. And my dad wrote it all down like he was documenting lab rats, because that's exactly what he was doing. He'd been conducting an unauthorized study on his own children. For decades, the entries laid it out in painful detail. He was testing parenting theories, authoritarian versus permissive styles, punishment-based versus reward-based motivation. He wanted to see how different approaches shape development, personality, achievement, and he needed 2 subjects raised in the same household with the same genetics to control for variables. So he used us, me and my brother, his own kids. I kept reading because I couldn't stop. I needed to see how deep it went. Turns out it went all the way down. Every punishment I received, every time he pushed me harder, every conversation where he questioned my choices or dismissed my feelings, it was all calculated, premeditated, written down and analyzed. He'd even color-coded his entries. Blue for my brother, red for me. Control group and variable. That's what we were to him. But that wasn't even the worst part. I found photocopies of academic papers tucked into the back of one journal. Papers he'd submitted to psychology journals. Published papers, with my and my brother's childhoods presented as case studies. Anonymized, sure. Names changed, details obscured just enough to protect his career. But it was us, our lives, our experiences, turned into data points and conclusions about parenting efficacy. He'd built a career partially on research stolen from his own children. Research we never consented to. Research that involved deliberately treating one of us worse to prove a theory. My brother had always been the favorite. I'd known that my whole life. He could do no wrong. I had to fight for every scrap of approval. I told myself it was because he was naturally easier, more outgoing, more likable, that I was too sensitive, too difficult. I'd spent years in therapy unpacking why I always felt like I wasn't good enough, why I constantly sought validation, why my self-worth was so tangled up in achievement and perfection. Now I knew why. I wasn't the difficult child. I was the variable, the one deliberately subjected to harsher treatment, so my dad could compare outcomes. My brother wasn't the favorite because he was better. He was the control group. He got the baseline, I got the experiment. I sat on that floor for hours reading journal after journal, watching my entire childhood recontextualized into something cold and calculated. Every memory I had was tainted now. Every moment I thought was real affection or genuine guidance was just part of the study. He'd recorded my tears after punishments, noted when I stopped trying to please him, tracked how his methods shaped my personality. He'd watched me struggle and wrote it down like a scientist observing a predictable reaction. The rage came in waves, then the grief, then this horrible numb feeling like I was watching my own life from outside my body. I confronted my mum that same night. I brought the journals, slammed them down on the kitchen table, and asked if she knew. Asked if she had any idea what he'd been doing. She looked at the journals, looked at me, and said yes, she knew. She'd helped. I genuinely thought this couldn't get worse. I was wrong. She'd been part of it, an active participant. She'd agreed to treat us differently, to enforce his experimental parenting strategies, to play her role in the study. They'd discussed it, planned it. She'd known the whole time that I was being deliberately subjected to harsher treatment, and she'd done it anyway because she believed in his research, because she thought the ends justified the means. I asked her how she could do that, how she could look at her own child and choose science over basic decency. She said they were going to tell us eventually, someday, when we were older and could understand the significance of the work, when we could appreciate the contribution we'd made to developmental psychology. That's when everything unraveled. I told her I'd never forgive her, that she'd participated in something unethical and cruel and tried to justify it with academic importance, that my entire childhood was a lie and she'd helped orchestrate it. She tried to explain, tried to say my dad loved us both, that the study didn't change that, but it did. It changed everything. I haven't spoken to her since that night, blocked her number, refused to see her. My brother doesn't fully understand why I've cut contact. He read some of the journals, but he doesn't get it the same way. He was the control group. He got the good childhood. His memories aren't poisoned. Mine are. My therapist says I'm grieving twice. Once for my dad, who I thought loved me unconditionally, but actually saw me as research. And once for the childhood I thought I had, but never did. She says it's going to take a long time to process. That trauma this deep doesn't heal quickly. I don't know if I'll ever forgive them. My dad's already gone, so that conversation will never happen. My mum is still alive but dead to me. Maybe that's harsh. Maybe someday I'll soften. But right now I'm just angry. Angry that I was used. Angry that my pain was data. Angry that two people who were supposed to protect me chose to experiment on me instead. The journals are still in my apartment. I should probably burn them, but I can't bring myself to do it yet. They're evidence. Proof that what I feel is real and justified. Proof that I'm not crazy for feeling betrayed. Sometimes I open one at random, read an entry, and feel the anger all over again. It's not healthy, but it's where I am. I wish I'd never found them. I wish I could go back to believing my childhood was normal, that my dad loved me the way I thought he did. But I can't unknow this, can't unsee it. The journals showed me the truth, and the truth destroyed everything. Parents keeping secrets is one thing, but when they actively conspire against you, that's when things get truly unforgivable, like selling your house while you're still living in it. After college, I moved back home, not because I was lazy or directionless, but because the economy was brutal and I was drowning in student loans. My mum told me I could stay as long as I needed. Those were her exact words, as long as I needed. So I took her up on it. I paid her rent, not much, but enough to cover utilities and groceries. I helped with bills, I mowed the lawn, I fixed things when they broke. When she traveled for work, which was often, I basically became the house manager, took care of everything, kept the place running. It felt like a fair arrangement. She got help, I got time to save money and figure out my next move. I'd been living there for about 8 months when things got weird. One Tuesday afternoon, I was working from home, sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop, when there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find a couple in their mid-30s, standing there with a woman in a blazer holding a clipboard. The woman smiled at me like we were old friends and said they were there for the final walkthrough before closing. I stared at her. Final walkthrough? Closing? I told her she had the wrong house. She checked her clipboard, looked at the address on the mailbox, and very politely told me no, this was definitely the right house. The couple looked uncomfortable. The realtor looked confused, and I felt like I'd just woken up in someone else's life. She explained that the closing was scheduled for Friday, 3 days away. They'd already done the inspection, the appraisal, all of it. This was just the final walkthrough to make sure everything was in order before they took ownership. I stood there in the doorway, my brain trying to catch up with what she was saying. I told her there had to be a mistake. I lived here. My mum owned this house. Nobody said anything about selling it. The realtor's face changed. That polite, professional smile faded into something that looked like concern mixed with pity. She asked if I was related to the owner. I said yes, I'm her daughter. I live here. She glanced at the couple, then back at me, and suggested maybe I should call my mum. Right now. I stepped back inside, grabbed my phone, and called her. She answered on the third ring, her voice chipper and distracted like she was in the middle of something. I didn't even say hello. I just asked her if she sold the house. There was a pause, a long one. Then she said, oh yeah, she thought she'd mentioned it, like it was a dentist appointment or a change in dinner plans. I asked her when exactly she mentioned selling the house I was currently living in. She got defensive immediately, said she brought it up a few months ago, that I clearly wasn't paying attention, and that honestly I needed to grow up and get my own place anyway. I was an adult, I couldn't live with her forever. I told her I was literally standing at the front door with the new owners and their realtor. She went quiet, then she said, well, the closing is Friday, so I'd need to be out by then. Just like that. Casual. Like she was telling me to pick up milk on the way home. I asked her how long she'd been planning this. She said about 4 months. 4 months. She'd listed the house, showed it to buyers, accepted an offer, gone through inspections and appraisals, and scheduled a closing, all without telling me. Her daughter, who lived there. The couple and the realtor were still standing on the porch. I apologized, told them I genuinely had no idea this was happening, and let them do their walkthrough. They were nice about it, sympathetic even, but they explained they'd already sold their previous home and had movers scheduled. They couldn't delay. The closing had to happen on Friday, so I had 72 hours. 72 hours to pack up 25 years of my life. Every childhood memory, every piece of furniture I'd grown up with, photos, books, clothes, all of it. I called my friend Sarah in a panic, and she said I could crash in her basement until I figured things out. I spent the next 3 days in this surreal haze, shoving my entire existence into boxes and trash bags. My mom didn't come home, didn't offer to help, didn't even call to check on me. She just texted once to remind me to leave the spare keys on the kitchen counter. Here's where it gets absurd. I found out later through a mutual friend that my mum had already bought a condo in Florida. She'd been planning her escape for months. Apparently, she was tired of the cold weather and the responsibility of maintaining a house. She wanted a fresh start, beach views, retirement community, the whole fantasy, and she funded it entirely with the profit from selling our family home. The house my dad had saved for, the house where I grew up. She kept every penny, didn't offer me anything, didn't even warn me so I could find a proper place to live. Just pulled the rug out from under me and moved to Florida. The new owners were kind. They let me take an extra day to finish packing, even though they didn't have to. On my last night in that house, I walked through the empty rooms, and it felt like saying goodbye to a person. Every creaky floorboard, every weird stain on the ceiling, every door frame where my dad had marked my height as I grew up. All of it gone, sold, erased. I moved into Sarah's basement with whatever fit in my car and a small storage unit. It was humiliating. I was supposed to be getting my life together, and instead I was sleeping on an air mattress, surrounded by boxes, trying to figure out how my own mother could do this to me. When I finally calmed down enough to think clearly, I called her one more time. I asked her why she didn't just tell me. Why she didn't give me notice. A real answer. Not the dismissive garbage she'd fed me before. She said she knew I'd make it difficult, that I'd guilt trip her or try to talk her out of it, that it was easier this way. Easier for her, maybe. For me, it was a betrayal that cut deeper than I knew family could cut. She chose a condo in Florida over her own daughter, chose convenience over basic human decency, chose herself and didn't look back. I haven't spoken to her since. She sends texts sometimes, occasionally a photo of a sunset or her new apartment. I don't respond. What would I even say? Thanks for the heads up about making me homeless. Hope the beach is nice. The worst part is she doesn't even seem to understand why I'm angry. In her mind, she did nothing wrong. She owned the house. It was her decision. I was an adult who needed to figure out my own life. Technically, she's right, but technically right and morally right are very different things. I'm doing better now. Found my own apartment. Small, but it's mine. I've started building a life that doesn't include her. But every now and then I drive past that old house and it stings. Not because I miss the building, because I miss the idea of having a mother who wouldn't do something like that. Some people really will choose an ocean view over their own kid. And honestly, I hope the sunsets are worth it. Real estate nightmares are rough, but nothing compares to the shock of discovering your family tree has branches you never knew existed, especially when they're dating your brother. I was adopted at birth and I've always known it. It wasn't some big secret or traumatic reveal. My adoptive parents told me when I was young, in the most loving way possible, and honestly, it never bothered me. They were my real parents in every way that mattered. I had a great childhood, a stable home, and a brother who was 2 years older than me. We fought like normal siblings, but we were close. Still are. Or at least we were before last Christmas turned into something out of a telenovela. My brother called me in early December, excited, saying he wanted me to meet his new girlfriend. He'd been dating her for about 8 months and things were getting serious. Her name was Sarah. He showed me pictures and I remember thinking she seemed nice. Pretty smile, seemed genuine in the photos. I was happy for him. He deserved someone good after his last relationship imploded. Christmas came and he brought Sarah home to meet the whole family. The second she walked through the door, my mum made this weird comment about how much we looked alike. I laughed it off. People say that kind of thing all the time, right? But then I actually looked at her. Really looked. And yeah, we did look similar. Same dark hair, same eye shape, similar build. It was one of those things where you don't see it at first, but once someone points it out, you can't unsee it. Sarah and I hit it off immediately. Like, instantly. We had the same sense of humor, liked the same music, even had similar mannerisms. It was kind of eerie how well we clicked. We spent most of Christmas Day talking, laughing, swapping stories. My brother joked that we were becoming better friends than he and Sarah were as a couple. Then came the coincidences. During dinner, birthdays came up. Turns out Sarah and I were born in the same month, just 3 days apart. We both loved the same obscure band that nobody else had ever heard of. We both had this weird habit of organizing things by color. Small things, but they kept piling up. And then Sarah mentioned casually that she was adopted too. The room went quiet for a second. My brother looked between us, kind of laughing nervously, and made a joke about how we were basically the same person. Sarah and I laughed too, but there was this weird energy in the air. My mum had this look on her face I couldn't quite read. Later that night, after too much wine, Sarah and I were joking around about being long-lost twins. It started as a funny conspiracy theory. We kept listing all the similarities, getting more dramatic and ridiculous with each one. My brother was rolling his eyes, telling us we were being absurd. But then Sarah said something that made my stomach flip. She said, "What if we actually were related and just didn't know it?" We were laughing when she said it, but the laugh died pretty quickly. We just kind of looked at each other, and I could tell we were both thinking the same thing. It would explain a lot. Too much, actually. Sarah pulled out her phone. She'd done one of those DNA ancestry tests a few months back, the kind where you send in your spit and they tell you where your ancestors came from. She showed me her results. I'd done the same test about a year ago, mostly out of curiosity about my biological background. I pulled up my results. We compared them. The ancestry percentages were nearly identical, like statistically improbable levels of identical. Eastern European, Scandinavian, the same weird trace amounts of everything else. My brother was watching us now, not laughing anymore. He looked nervous, actually nervous. Sarah and I decided right then, half drunk on Christmas wine, to do a sibling DNA test, one of those kits you can order that tells you if you share DNA with someone. We ordered it that night, paid extra for rush processing. My brother tried to talk us out of it, saying we were being paranoid, that lots of people have similar ancestry, but his voice had this edge to it, like he knew something we didn't want to confirm. The kit arrived 3 days later. We both did the swabs, sent them back, and waited. Those 2 weeks were the longest of my life. Sarah and I texted constantly, going back and forth between, "This is crazy," "We're not related," and "What if we actually are though?" My brother stopped responding to my messages about it entirely. Then the results came. I was at work when the email arrived. I opened it on my phone, hands shaking. Half siblings. We shared a biological mother. The match was unmistakable, undeniable, backed by science and percentages I didn't fully understand, but knew meant one thing. Sarah was my sister, my actual biological half-sister. I called her immediately. She'd gotten the same email. She was crying, not sad crying, not happy crying, just this overwhelmed, shocked, what the actual hell is happening crying. We were sisters, which meant my brother had been dating my sister. His girlfriend was my biological half-sibling. I don't think I've ever seen my brother look the way he looked when we told him. Horrified doesn't cover it. He went pale, then red, then pale again. He kept saying no, like if he said it enough times the DNA results would change. Sarah was in denial too, saying maybe the test was wrong, maybe we should do another one, but we both knew. Deep down, we knew. I contacted the adoption agency, or tried to. Turns out the records were sealed. Took me 3 weeks and a lawyer to get any information at all. What I found out made everything worse somehow. Our biological mother had 2 daughters, me and Sarah. She'd placed us both for adoption, but through different agencies in different states, 3 days apart. The system never flagged it. The records were kept separate. There was no mechanism in place to tell adoptive families that their kids had biological siblings out there somewhere. Neither of us had known. Our adoptive families hadn't known. The agencies didn't communicate. We'd grown up 2 states apart, completely unaware the other existed, until my brother happened to meet Sarah at a coffee shop 8 months ago and thought she was cute. The breakup was immediate. It had to be. But that didn't make it any less devastating. My brother and Sarah had been together for 8 months. They were genuinely in love, talking about moving in together, talking about a future, and now that was just gone. Over. Not because they didn't care about each other, but because continuing the relationship was completely off the table for obvious reasons. My brother was a mess. Sarah was a mess. I felt like I'd detonated a bomb in the middle of my family by suggesting that stupid DNA test. But also, what was the alternative? Let them keep dating, get engaged. Get married, have kids. The longer it went on, the worse it would have been when the truth eventually came out. And it would have come out. We all ended up in family therapy, all of us, Me, Sarah, my brother, our parents. It was the most surreal experience of my life. Sitting in a room talking about how my brother's ex-girlfriend was now functionally my sister, and how we all needed to process this bizarre twist of fate that nobody could have predicted. Sarah and I are close now, actually close. We talk almost every day. We've met each other's adoptive families. We've bonded over this shared history we didn't know we had. It's been healing in a lot of ways. I have a sister, a real biological sister who gets parts of me nobody else does. But holidays are weird, really, really weird. Sarah comes to Christmas now because she's family, but my brother excuses himself from parts of it. He's polite, civil, but you can tell it still hurts. He sees the person he was in love with, sitting at the family table, laughing with his sister, and it's just this constant reminder of what he lost. My mum tries to make it normal. She sets the table, makes too much food, pretends everything's fine, but there's this tension that never fully goes away, this awkwardness that settles over the room whenever Sarah and my brother are in the same space. I found my sister. I'm grateful for that. But the cost was my brother's relationship, his happiness, and a family dynamic that will probably never fully recover. We don't talk about it much anymore. We just exist around it. This massive DNA-confirmed elephant in every room. The universe has a twisted sense of humor sometimes. And I'm still not sure if finding out the truth was worth the collateral damage it caused. Family scandals can implode privately, but when they go public, that's when the real damage starts, especially when your grandmother decides to post on Facebook. I just started my dream job at one of the most prestigious law firms in the city. Conservative old money, the kind of place where partners still wore three-piece suits and the office had portraits of founding members from like 1870-something hanging in the lobby. It wasn't exactly my vibe politically, but the salary was absurd and the experience would set me up for basically any career path I wanted. I knew what I was getting into. Strict dress code, even stricter unspoken rules about keeping your personal opinions personal, and a culture that valued tradition above pretty much everything else. I'd spent weeks preparing for this job before I even started. I scrubbed my social media accounts clean, went through every Instagram post, every Twitter like, every Facebook photo from the last decade. I made everything private, untagged myself from anything remotely controversial, even deleted my LinkedIn posts that were too casual. I was paranoid about it because I knew how important image was to this firm. They'd made that very clear during the interview process. This wasn't the kind of place that appreciated individuality or hot takes. This was the kind of place where you showed up, did excellent work, kept your head down, and collected a paycheck that made your student loans look like pocket change. What I didn't account for, what I couldn't have possibly predicted, was my 72-year-old grandmother's complete and utter lack of understanding about how Facebook works. My grandma is sweet, she's loving, she's supportive, she thinks everything I do is amazing. She also thinks Facebook is a personal scrapbook that only she and her book club friends can see. She does not understand tagging. She does not understand privacy settings. She definitely does not understand that when you tag someone's employer in a post, people from that employer can see it. This woman once posted a photo of her credit card, asking if anyone knew why it wasn't working at the grocery store. She's a menace on social media and doesn't even know it. So there I am, 3 weeks into my new job, finally feeling like I'm getting the hang of things. I'm staying late, making good impressions, keeping every opinion I have about anything locked away in a vault. And then my phone starts blowing up. Notifications, lots of them, all Facebook. I'm at my desk and I glance at my phone during lunch and my stomach just drops. My grandma had posted a photo from my college days, 4 years old, me at a reproductive rights protest, holding a sign with some very explicit, very unambiguous language about bodily autonomy and what certain politicians could do with their opinions. It was not subtle, it was not office appropriate, it was the kind of photo that would make HR at a progressive startup nervous, let alone a law firm that probably had oil paintings of Ronald Reagan in the conference rooms. But that wasn't even the worst part. She'd tagged me. Fine, I could untag myself, but she'd also tagged my employer, the firm's official Facebook page, and she'd written a caption that made me want to sink into the floor and disappear forever. So proud of my activist granddaughter exclamation point, followed by like 6 heart emojis and 3 American flags, which honestly just added to the confusion of the whole post. I immediately untagged myself, I called her. She didn't answer because she never has her phone volume on. I texted her. She doesn't really check texts. I sent her a Facebook message begging her to take it down. By the time she saw it and deleted it, 4 hours had passed. 4 hours. Do you know how many people can see a post in 4 hours? Apparently enough. My boss saw it within the first hour. I know this because the next morning I was called into HR. Not my direct supervisor's office. Not a casual check-in. Human resources. The woman from HR had printed out the post. She had a physical copy of it on her desk when I walked in. My face, my sign, my grandmother's caption, all there in full color on company letterhead, like some kind of evidence in a trial. She didn't waste time with small talk. She said the firm had become aware of some concerning social media activity that involved me, and that they felt I didn't align with the firm's values. I tried to explain. I really did. I told her it was from college, that it was years old, that my grandma didn't understand how tagging worked, that she deleted it as soon as I told her to. I emphasized that I kept my personal beliefs completely separate from my professional life, that I understood and respected the firm's culture, that this didn't represent who I was as an employee. She listened, nodded politely, and then told me that because I was still in my probationary period, they were choosing to end my employment effective immediately. Just like that. 3 weeks of work, gone. My dream job, gone. All because my grandmother thought Facebook was a private family photo album and wanted to brag about her granddaughter. I packed up my desk in about 10 minutes. I didn't have much there yet. A coffee mug, some pens, a framed photo I'd brought in to make the space feel less sterile. I walked out of that building in a daze, trying to process what had just happened. I'd done everything right. I'd been so careful, and I'd been taken down by something completely out of my control. When I finally got through to my grandma that evening, she felt terrible. She cried. She kept apologizing, saying she didn't know, that she just wanted to show people how proud she was of me. I wasn't angry at her. How could I be? She genuinely had no idea what she'd done. She still doesn't fully understand, honestly. She knows the post got me in trouble, but she doesn't really grasp why a photo of me exercising my constitutional rights would be a problem. I've tried explaining it to her. The generational gap is just too wide. The worst part was explaining to my parents what happened. They were horrified. My mum offered to call the firm and explain, which would have accomplished absolutely nothing except making it worse. My dad suggested I sue for wrongful termination, but I was in a probationary period in an at-will employment state. I had no case. They could fire me for any reason or no reason, as long as it wasn't discrimination against a protected class. And my grandma's Facebook skills definitely didn't qualify. I spent the next month job hunting, being way more selective this time. I also went through my Facebook friends list with a fine-tooth comb. I unfriended anyone over the age of 60 who I wasn't absolutely certain understood internet privacy. That sounds harsh, but I couldn't risk it again. I love my relatives, but I cannot trust them with my professional reputation. I change all my settings so I have to manually approve any tags before they appear on my profile. I basically turned my social media presence into Fort Knox. I eventually found another position, not quite as prestigious, but honestly probably a better cultural fit. The pay was slightly lower, but my mental health improved significantly when I realized I could actually be myself at work instead of cosplaying as a 1950s corporate drone. So in a weird way, my grandma's Facebook disaster might have saved me from years of misery at a job that would never have truly valued me anyway. She still posts on Facebook constantly. Last week she shared a minion meme about coffee that had a virus link attached to it. She called me asking why her computer was acting weird. I love her dearly, but I've learned my lesson. She's restricted on all my profiles now, and I check what she posts about me religiously. Trust, but verify, especially when it comes to grandparents and social media. Getting fired unfairly stings, but sometimes karma delivers justice in the most satisfying ways, especially when you have receipts and a board of directors on speed dial. I'd spent 6 months developing a comprehensive client retention strategy for our company. 6 months of research, data analysis, late-night spreadsheet modeling, testing different approaches with focus groups, everything. This wasn't some half-baked idea I threw together in an afternoon. It was thorough, well-researched, and I genuinely believed it could change how our company approached customer loyalty. I was proud of it. probably the best work I'd done in my 5 years at the company. When I finally presented it in our monthly team meeting, the response was incredible. Everyone seemed genuinely excited. People were asking questions, suggesting minor tweaks, talking about implementation timelines. But my boss, Rachel, was particularly enthusiastic. She kept saying things like, "This is exactly what we need," and "I love where your head's at with this," and "We need to get this in front of the board as soon as possible." I remember feeling validated, like all those months of work were finally paying off. Rachel even pulled me aside after the meeting and told me she was going to personally champion this strategy to upper management, said she saw big things in my future. 2 weeks later, Rachel sent out a calendar invite for an emergency board presentation. The subject line was vague, something about a major strategic initiative. I figured she was bringing me in to present my retention strategy like she'd promised. I started prepping, rehearsing talking points, getting ready to answer executive level questions. The day before the presentation, I asked Rachel if she wanted to review my slides together. She told me not to worry about it, that she'd handled the presentation and I should just focus on my regular workload. Said the board preferred to hear from senior leadership first, and if they wanted details, they loop me in later. Red flag. Huge red flag. But I trusted her. She was my boss. She'd always seemed supportive. So I didn't push back. The presentation happened without me. I wasn't even invited to attend. I found out later that Rachel had presented my entire strategy to the board, slide for slide, data point for data point, as her own idea. Not our team's idea, not a collaborative effort. Her idea. She'd literally taken my presentation, changed the name in the footer from mine to hers, and delivered it like she'd spent the last 6 months developing it herself. My name was mentioned exactly 0 times. The board loved it, approved immediate implementation, allocated budget. And Rachel, she got a promotion to senior vice president and a $20,000 performance bonus. Meanwhile, I was sitting at my desk working on quarterly reports, completely unaware that my career-defining work had just been stolen and repackaged as someone else's brilliance. I found out about the whole thing through office gossip. One of the other managers, someone who'd been in my original team meeting, came up to me looking confused and asked why Rachel was taking credit for my retention strategy. I thought he was joking at first. Then he showed me the company-wide email announcing Rachel's promotion and specifically citing her innovative client retention framework as the reason. The rage I felt in that moment was unlike anything I'd experienced in a professional setting. Not just anger, betrayal, humiliation, the realization that someone I'd trusted, someone who was supposed to mentor and support me, had looked me in the eye and lied while actively planning to steal my work. I wanted to march into her office and confront her immediately, but I knew that would go nowhere. It would be my word against hers, and she was now a senior VP while I was still a mid-level manager. No one was going to take my side without evidence. Here's where it gets absurd. I went home that night, poured myself a drink, and sat down to figure out my options. Quitting felt like letting her win. Staying quiet felt like accepting the theft. I needed proof, something undeniable. And then I remembered our company's Slack history. We discussed the retention strategy extensively over Slack during development. I'd sent her research summaries, draft frameworks, preliminary data analysis, months of conversation documenting that this was my project, my idea, my work. I opened Slack and started scrolling, and there it was, everything, every single message proving the strategy was mine. But the real evidence was a text message she'd sent me late one night, about 3 weeks before my team presentation. Her exact words, "Hey, can you send me the details on that retention thing you mentioned? Want to review before you present?" She'd literally asked me for details on my own idea, so she could familiarize herself with it before I presented. The timestamp, the phrasing, everything pointed to the fact that this was my concept, and she was just reviewing it as my supervisor. I took screenshots of everything, every Slack message, every email, every timestamp. I organized it chronologically in a document with a professional summary explaining exactly what had happened. I kept the tone neutral, factual, let the evidence speak for itself. No emotional rants, no accusations beyond what the proof showed. Just, here's the timeline, here's the documentation, here's what occurred. Then I sent it anonymously to the board chairman. Used a burner email account, made sure there was no way to trace it back to me directly. I included a note saying I was bringing this to his attention because the company's integrity was at stake, and I believed the board had been misled. Then came the breaking point. The board launched an internal investigation within 48 hours. I know because Rachel got called into an emergency meeting with HR and the chairman. She came out looking pale, shaken. The whole office could feel that something major was happening, but no one knew what. Over the next week, several people were interviewed. I was pulled into a conference room and asked about my involvement in client retention initiatives. I answered honestly, provided additional documentation they requested, maintained a completely professional demeanor. Never mentioned that I was the one who'd sent the anonymous email. The investigation took 3 weeks total. At the end of it, the board made their decision. Rachel was demoted back to her previous position. She had to return the $20,000 bonus in full. Her promotion was rescinded, and I was called into the chairman's office for a private meeting. He told me they'd thoroughly reviewed the evidence and determined that the client retention strategy was unquestionably my work. He apologized on behalf of the company for what had happened. Then he offered me Rachel's former position, Senior Vice President, with the salary and bonus that should have been mine from the start. I accepted. Rachel resigned a month later, didn't even give 2 weeks' notice, just sent an email saying her last day was Friday and never came back to clean out her office. HR had to box up her things and mail them to her. I heard through the grapevine that she'd tried to spin the situation in job interviews, claiming the investigation was politically motivated, but our industry is small and word travels fast. Last I checked, she was working at a much smaller firm, in a position well below what she'd had with us. The board chairman pulled me aside about a week after Rachel left. We were in the elevator, just the two of us, and he said something I'll never forget. Always keep receipts. That's it. Just those 3 words. Then he got off on his floor and the doors closed. But the message was clear. He knew I'd been the one to send that anonymous email. He knew I'd documented everything, and he respected it. I do keep receipts now. Every project, every idea, every contribution. I save emails, screenshot Slacks, document conversations. Not because I'm paranoid, but because I learned the hard way that trust in a professional environment has limits. People will take credit for your work if given the opportunity. Protecting yourself isn't cynical. It's smart. Professional revenge is sweet. But personal humiliation, that cuts deeper, especially when your resignation letter becomes someone else's job application. I worked retail for 3 years at a clothing store that I'm not going to name, but let's just say it rhymes with fashion disaster. By the end, I was so burned out that I'd started having actual stress dreams about folding jeans. The job had been fine at first, typical retail stuff, but over time the management became increasingly unhinged. We were chronically understaffed, constantly pressured to upsell, and scheduled in ways that made having any kind of life outside work basically impossible. My manager, who I'll call Rachel, had this special talent for making everything worse. She'd schedule you to close at 11 p.m. and then open at 6 a.m. the next day. She'd promise you weekends off and then call you at 7 in the morning saying you were on the schedule and needed to come in immediately. She'd cut your hours as punishment for minor things, then demand you stay late without notice when it suited her. It was a masterclass in bad management, and I watched person after person quit because of her. I tried to stick it out. I needed the job, the money, and honestly, I'd convinced myself it would get better. Spoiler alert, it did not get better. The final straw came when Rachel scheduled me for a double shift on my birthday, without asking, then told me I was being ungrateful when I asked if I could at least leave early. That night, I went home and started writing my resignation letter. Not just a quick 2 weeks notice, a full, detailed, professionally written document outlining every single labor violation, scheduling abuse, and management failure I'd witnessed over 3 years. I took my time with it. 2 full pages, single-spaced, documented incidents with dates wherever I could remember them. I mentioned the time she made an employee work through a migraine because we were short-staffed, the times she'd changed schedules without notice and then written people up for not showing up, the way she'd retaliate against anyone who pushed back by cutting their hours, the lack of proper training for new hires, the safety violations, the pressure to clock out but keep working, everything. I was professional about it, no name-calling or emotional language, just facts and specific examples. Then I made copies, submitted one to HR, kept one for myself, and left. The 2 weeks notice period was predictably awful. Rachel barely spoke to me and made sure I got the worst possible shifts. But I showed up, did my job, and counted down the days. When my last shift ended, I walked out of that store feeling lighter than I had in years. I thought that was the end of it. Close the chapter, move on, find something better. And for 3 months, that's exactly what I did. I got a new job that actually respected labor laws and treated employees like humans. Life improved dramatically. Then I got a text from Jenna, a former co-worker who still worked there. It was a screenshot of a job posting, my old position. The listing was looking for a replacement for me, and Jenna had sent it because she thought I'd find it hilarious. Except when I actually read the job description, hilarious wasn't the word that came to mind. The posting was my resignation letter. Not word for word, but close enough that it was unmistakable. Every single complaint I'd documented had been reworded as a job requirement. I'd written about forced overtime and unpredictable scheduling. The posting said the ideal candidate must be comfortable with flexible scheduling and able to adapt to changing shift needs. I'd complained about being constantly understaffed and overwhelmed. The posting said they needed someone who thrives in fast-paced environments and can handle high-pressure situations. I'd mentioned the complete lack of training or support. The posting said they wanted an independent problem solver who takes initiative without needing supervision. It was like reading a parody of itself. Every toxic thing I'd called out was now being advertised as a positive trait they were actively looking for. Must be able to work evenings, weekends, and holidays without advance notice. Must be comfortable with a dynamic work environment where priorities shift rapidly. Must be self-motivated and able to succeed with minimal guidance. It was absolutely unhinged, but that wasn't even the worst part. At the bottom of the listing, in the additional requirements section, it said candidates should be team players who don't create unnecessary drama or complaints. I actually laughed out loud at that one. They'd taken my detailed documentation of labor violations and management abuse, repackaged it as job requirements, then added a note saying they didn't want anyone who would complain about it. The lack of self-awareness was genuinely impressive. I took screenshots of everything, the job posting, my original resignation letter, all of it. Then I wrote an email to corporate HR. Very polite, very professional. Just, hey, thought you might want to see this interesting situation. I attached the job posting and my original resignation letter side by side so they could see the comparison themselves. I pointed out that this seemed to suggest the issues I'd raised were not only unaddressed, but were now being openly advertised as normal working conditions. Then I hit send and waited. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. Corporate HR did not take this well. Apparently, having documented proof that a store manager was essentially advertising labor violations as job requirements was the kind of thing that triggers immediate investigations. They contacted me within 2 days asking for additional details and clarification on specific incidents from my letter. I gave them everything I had: dates, witnesses, other employees who could corroborate. They took it seriously in a way the local HR never had. The investigation took about 3 weeks. During that time, they interviewed current and former employees, reviewed scheduling records, looked at time clock data. Turns out, when you actually examine the patterns, it becomes really obvious when someone's been violating labor laws consistently. They found multiple issues I'd mentioned and several I hadn't even known about. Rachel had been falsifying time cards, forcing people to work off the clock, retaliating against employees who requested legally protected leave. It was a whole mess. Rachel got fired, not quietly asked to resign, fired, escorted out of the store by corporate security and everything. The assistant manager who'd been enabling her got demoted and transferred. Corporate brought in a completely new management team and implemented new scheduling systems and oversight processes. For a few months, it seemed like maybe things would actually improve. At that location, they didn't. The store shut down 6 months later. Apparently, the combination of high turnover, bad reputation in the area, and the costs of fixing all the operational issues made it not worth keeping open. I heard through Jenna, who'd transferred to another location by then, that corporate had used the whole situation in some kind of internal training program. My resignation letter and the job posting became a case study in what not to do as a manager. They apparently show it in training seminars now as an example of how toxic management destroys locations. The irony is not lost on me. I wrote that letter just wanting to document why I was leaving, maybe give HR a heads up about problems they should address. I never expected it to end up in corporate training materials or lead to an entire store closure. But Rachel had basically handed them a roadmap of her own failures by using my complaints as a job description. She documented her own violations in a public job posting. Workplace retaliation is bad enough, but when you discover the whole system has been lying to everyone, that's when things get explosive. I was the office golden child. That sounds arrogant, but it's just true. I'd been with the company for 4 years, consistently hit my targets, got along with everyone, and management loved me. I'd won Employee of the Quarter 3 times. My annual reviews were glowing. I got bonuses that made my friends jealous. When the company needed someone to train new hires or lead a special project, they came to me. I wasn't just good at my job, I was visible. I had a reputation. People knew my name before they met me. So when HR rolled out a new payroll and management software system, they asked me to help with the data migration. It made sense. I was trusted, detail-oriented, and had enough technical skills to handle the transfer without screwing anything up. They gave me admin access to the old system and the new one, handed me a massive spreadsheet, and told me to input employee information carefully. Salaries, job titles, department codes, start dates, the whole thing. It was tedious work, but I didn't mind. I liked being useful. I was about 3 hours into the data entry when I started noticing something off. At first, I thought I was misreading the numbers, or that there was a formatting error in the spreadsheet. But the more I looked, the clearer it became. People doing identical jobs were making vastly different salaries, and I don't mean small differences like a few $1,000s based on seniority or performance. I'm talking $20,000 to $30,000 gaps between employees with the same title, same responsibilities, same years of experience. I started cross-referencing. I pulled up job descriptions. I looked at performance reviews that were stored in the system, and a pattern emerged that made my stomach turn. Women were making less than men in the same roles. Minority employees were making less than their white counterparts. It was consistent, it was obvious, and it had been happening for years. There was this one example that really stuck with me. 2 marketing managers, both hired within 6 months of each other, both with similar backgrounds and education. One was a white guy named Brett. The other was a black woman named Simone. Brett was making $78,000. Simone was making $52,000. Same job, same department, same expectations, $26,000 difference. I sat there staring at the screen, trying to make sense of it. Maybe there was an explanation I wasn't seeing. Maybe Brett had negotiated harder. Maybe Simone had taken a pay cut to join the company. But the more I dug, the more examples I found. It wasn't isolated. It was systemic. I documented everything. I made a separate spreadsheet with side-by-side comparisons, pulled job descriptions, noted hire dates and performance ratings. Then I scheduled a meeting with the HR director, a woman named Patricia, who'd always been friendly to me. I genuinely thought this was a mistake, some kind of clerical error that had compounded over time. I thought I was helping fix a problem. Patricia listened to my presentation with a neutral expression. I walked her through the data, showed her the patterns, explained why I thought this needed to be corrected immediately. When I finished, she closed my laptop and looked at me with this cold, calculating stare I'd never seen from her before. She told me to forget what I saw, just like that, said salary information was confidential and that I'd violated company policy by analyzing it, even though I'd been given access specifically to do data entry. Then she said that discussing salaries with co-workers or anyone else was grounds for immediate termination. She made it sound official, legal, threatening. Here's the thing though, I'd taken a business law class in college. I knew that was garbage. Employees have a federally protected right to discuss wages. It's illegal for companies to retaliate against workers for talking about pay. Patricia was lying to my face, trying to intimidate me into silence. I didn't argue with her in that moment. I just nodded, said I understood, and left her office. But I was furious, and I knew exactly what I was going to do next. I went straight to the CEO, not my direct supervisor, not the COO, straight to the top. I requested a meeting for the end of the day, marked it urgent. When I sat down in her office, I laid out everything I'd found. I showed her the spreadsheet, the comparisons, the pattern of discrimination. I told her what Patricia had said, how she'd tried to threaten me into staying quiet. The CEO's face went from confused to horrified to absolutely livid in the span of about 5 minutes. She thanked me for bringing it to her attention, said she'd handle it personally, told me not to discuss it with anyone until she'd had time to investigate. I agreed and left, feeling like I'd done the right thing, like I'd actually made a difference. The CEO launched a full audit, brought in an outside firm to review every salary in the company, every promotion, every raise over the past 6 years. It took 2 months, and when the results came back, it was worse than I'd initially found. The pay discrimination wasn't just happening in a few departments, it was company-wide. HR had been systematically underpaying women and minorities for years, and Patricia had been covering it up. Multiple employees got significant back pay. Some people received checks for over $50,000. Simone, the marketing manager I'd noticed, got a $30,000 raise and back pay that totaled close to 80 grand. The company issued a formal apology and implemented new salary transparency policies. Patricia was fired. So was her deputy, who'd apparently been complicit. It should have been a win. It should have felt like justice. But that wasn't even the worst part. Suddenly, I wasn't the golden child anymore. Management started treating me differently. Not overtly hostile, just cold, distant. My project assignments dried up. I stopped getting invited to strategy meetings. When I'd walk into a room, conversations would stop. People who used to seek my input started going around me. I went from being the go-to person to being invisible. And sometimes, worse than invisible. I could feel the resentment. One of the senior managers, a guy who'd always been friendly, pulled me aside one day and told me straight up that I'd made a lot of people uncomfortable, that I'd embarrassed the company, that exposing the pay gap had cost the company millions in back pay and legal fees, and leadership wouldn't forget that. He didn't say I'd be fired. He didn't have to. The message was clear. I was a traitor. The employees who'd benefited from the audit were grateful. Simone sent me a thank you card. A few others bought me coffee, told me I'd changed their lives. But the people with power, the ones who controlled my career trajectory, they saw me as the person who'd caused a problem, not solved one. I stuck it out for 6 months, kept doing my job, kept my head down, applied to positions elsewhere. When I finally got an offer from another company, better title, better pay, better culture, I took it without hesitation. I gave my 2 weeks' notice and didn't bother with an exit interview. There was nothing left to say. On my last day, Simone and a few others took me out for lunch. They told me I'd done something brave, something that mattered. And I believed them. I still do. But I also learned something important. Companies don't reward people for exposing their failures. They punish them, even when you're right, especially when you're right. I don't regret what I did. Those people deserved fair pay. They deserved to know they'd been cheated, but I won't pretend it didn't cost me something. My reputation at that company was destroyed. My career there was over the second I opened my mouth, and I made my peace with that. Being blacklisted for doing the right thing is rough, but at least I had my integrity. Unlike the coworker who stole someone's identity and learned the hard way that crime doesn't pay. My work ID badge went missing from my desk on a Tuesday afternoon. I'd left it sitting there during lunch, came back, and it was gone. I looked everywhere, under papers, in drawers, checked the floor around my cubicle thinking maybe it had fallen. Nothing. I figured someone probably picked it up by accident, or maybe it got swept into the trash during cleaning. It happens. So I reported it to HR, filled out the form for a lost badge, and got a replacement the next day. Annoying, but not the end of the world. I didn't think about it again, just went about my normal routine, showed up at 8, worked my shift, went home. Our office building had pretty standard security. Badge scanners at every entrance, cameras in the hallways, the usual corporate setup. Nothing felt off. Nothing seemed wrong. Then 2 weeks later, I got a phone call that made absolutely no sense. It was a Saturday night around 9 p.m. I was at home in my pajamas watching a movie with my girlfriend. My phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Normally I'd ignore it, but something made me pick up. It was building security, a guy named Marcus who I'd seen at the front desk a few times. He asked very politely why I was on the third floor at 11 p.m. last Saturday. I told him he must have the wrong person because I was definitely not at the office last Saturday at 11 p.m. I was home, asleep. Marcus went quiet for a second, then said my badge had been scanned accessing the third floor server room at 11:04 p.m. last Saturday, and again at 1:15 a.m. He said they were reviewing footage because there'd been some inventory discrepancies, and they were trying to figure out who had access to certain areas after hours. I repeated that it wasn't me, that my badge had been stolen 2 weeks ago, and I'd reported it. I could hear him typing, presumably pulling up my report. Then he asked if I could come in tomorrow to review the security footage with them. The way he said it made my stomach turn. This wasn't a casual request. I showed up Sunday morning. Marcus met me in the security office along with the head of security, a woman named Patricia, who looked like she'd been up all night. They pulled up the footage from last Saturday on a monitor, and there, clear as day, was someone using my badge to access the third floor. The timestamp showed 11:04 p.m., exactly like Marcus had said. The person on camera was my co-worker Derek. Derek worked in IT support. Quiet guy, kept to himself, always seemed a little shifty, but I'd never had a real reason to suspect anything. We weren't friends, barely spoke beyond the occasional nod in the hallway. But there he was on the security footage, using my stolen badge to get into restricted areas. Patricia fast-forwarded through several nights of footage. Derek had been doing this for weeks, using my badge to access the server room, the equipment storage areas, places he technically had authorization to enter during business hours, but definitely shouldn't be in at midnight on weekends. The footage showed him carrying boxes out, loading things into his car in the parking garage. He'd been systematically stealing company equipment, and my badge was his golden ticket to do it, without raising flags on his own access logs. Then came the breaking point. Patricia told me they'd confronted Derek that morning. He'd shown up for his shift like normal, and security had pulled him into an office. When they accused him of using a stolen badge to access restricted areas, he didn't deny it. Instead, he claimed he was me. Actually said those words, that his name was my name, that there must be some mistake with the badge system. Security asked for his ID, and Derek pulled out a driver's license, with my name on it, and his photo. He'd printed a fake ID, a completely fabricated driver's license, with my full legal name, my address, and his picture. Patricia showed me a photocopy of it. It looked almost real, good enough to pass a casual glance. He'd apparently been planning this for a while. But here's where it gets absurd. When they ran Derek's actual name through the system to verify employment records, they discovered he had multiple outstanding warrants, unpaid tickets that had turned into bench warrants, a missed court date for something else, the works. He'd been dodging them for months, and apparently his brilliant plan was to use my identity to avoid getting caught. He thought if he could convince people he was me, he could slide under the radar. Security called the police immediately. Derek was arrested on site, didn't even make it out of the building. They got him for identity theft, fraud, burglary, theft of company property, and probably half a dozen other charges I'm forgetting. Plus, all those warrants he'd been running from finally caught up with him. The police took my statement. I had to explain the whole timeline. When my badge went missing, when I reported it, where I was on the nights Derek had been using it. They pulled my phone records, my credit card statements, everything to verify my alibi. Which was easy because I'm boring and I was home every single one of those nights. They needed to build a clear case that I had nothing to do with any of it. Then came the nightmare of dealing with the aftermath. I had to freeze my credit because who knows what else Derek might have tried to do with my information. Filed police reports, got a fraud alert put on all my accounts, contacted the DMV to make sure no one had tried to get a real ID in my name, spent hours on the phone with various agencies explaining over and over that, no, I didn't commit any crimes. Yes, someone stole my identity. No, I don't know why he picked me specifically. The company was weirdly cagey about the whole thing at first. They did an internal investigation, tried to figure out how Derek had managed to steal so much equipment without anyone noticing. Turns out their inventory system was a mess, and their after-hours security protocols were basically non-existent. Derek had walked out with thousands of dollars worth of computers, monitors, and networking equipment over the course of 6 weeks. My lawyer suggested I should probably have a conversation with corporate about their security failures, enabling identity theft, and putting me at risk. That conversation resulted in a very quick settlement offer. They didn't want the bad press, didn't want a lawsuit pointing out how easy it was for an employee to steal another employee's badge and commit crimes for weeks without anyone noticing. So they paid me, made me sign an NDA, fixed their security systems. The whole thing got swept under the rug as much as legally possible. Derek, meanwhile, went to prison. The charges stacked up. Identity theft alone is serious, but combined with the burglary, the fraud, the violation of the warrants, he's looking at years. Last I heard, he took a plea deal, but he's still locked up. Probably will be for a while. The whole experience was surreal. I kept thinking about how random it was. Derek could have stolen anyone's badge, could have picked any other person in that office to impersonate, but he chose mine. And because he chose mine, I spent months dealing with credit freezes and police reports and lawyers, because some guy I barely knew decided my identity was convenient. I don't work there anymore. The settlement was enough that I could take my time finding something else. Somewhere with better security, somewhere I don't have to worry about coworkers printing fake driver's licenses with my name on them. And I never leave my ID badge unattended. Not for a second. That lesson got learned the hard way. Criminal coworkers are terrifying, but sometimes the most satisfying revenge is purely accidental. Like when a group chat excludes the wrong person. My team had been icing me out for weeks. At first I thought I was being paranoid. You know that feeling when something's off but you can't quite put your finger on it? Conversations would stop when I walked into the break room. People would exchange glances during meetings. Inside jokes I wasn't part of. That kind of thing. I tried to shake it off, told myself I was overthinking, but the cold shoulder was getting harder to ignore. I couldn't figure out what I'd done wrong. I showed up on time, did my work, met my deadlines. I wasn't perfect, but I wasn't a nightmare coworker either. I'd even brought donuts to the last team meeting. So why did everyone suddenly act like I had some kind of contagious disease? Then I started noticing the group chat situation. We had an official team chat for work stuff, and that was still active, but the vibe had changed. Messages were shorter, more formal. Nobody was cracking jokes anymore. It felt sterile, corporate, like everyone was suddenly being very careful about what they said. That's when I realized there had to be another chat, one without me. I felt like I was back in middle school, except instead of passing notes behind my back, my adult coworkers were digitally excluding me, and I had no idea why. I thought about confronting someone, but what would I even say? Hey, are you guys talking about me in a secret group chat? That sounded paranoid and desperate even in my head. The truth came out in the most spectacular way possible. During a regular team meeting, our CEO Richard mentioned something oddly specific about a project complaint that I knew hadn't been discussed in any official channel. He made a passing comment about communication styles and team cohesion that felt pointed. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I didn't think much of it at the time, but then I got a message from Richard directly. Just a simple, "Can we talk after the meeting?" My stomach dropped. Was I getting fired? Had someone complained about me officially? I spent the rest of the meeting trying not to panic, while also running through every interaction I'd had in the past month, looking for what I might have done wrong. After everyone filed out, Richard closed the door to the conference room and pulled out his phone. He looked almost amused, which was confusing given how serious I thought this conversation was going to be. Then he showed me a screen. It was a group chat with my entire team, except me. And the messages were brutal. People complaining about me, mocking the way I presented in meetings. Someone had screenshotted one of my emails and added laughing emojis. There were inside jokes at my expense, comments about my clothes, my voice, the way I organized my desk, 3 days worth of messages, just petty, mean garbage about me. I felt sick, but I was also confused about why Richard was showing me this. Then he explained. They'd meant to create a group chat without me, but they'd accidentally added him instead. See, his name is Richard Chen. My name is Rachel Chen. Same last name. In the contacts list, we're right next to each other. Someone had scrolled too fast, selected the wrong Chen, and nobody had noticed. For 3 full days, Richard had been in this group chat, watching my coworkers trash talk me. He hadn't said a single word, just observed, took screenshots, documented everything. The level of restraint that must have taken is honestly impressive. Then came the breaking point. Richard told me he'd already spoken to HR. that what I'd just seen was going to be addressed formally. He said he wanted to give me a heads up before the next all-hands meeting, which was scheduled for the following day. I didn't know whether to thank him or cry or both. I settled for a nod and left before I could embarrass myself. The all-hands meeting the next day was legendary. Richard started with the usual updates, quarterly numbers, upcoming projects. Then his tone shifted. He said he wanted to address some communication issues that had come to his attention. The room got very quiet. You could feel the tension. Then he started reading messages, out loud, to everyone. He didn't name who said what, just read them verbatim. Comments about teammates, complaints about projects, the mocking messages about presentation styles. Every cruel, petty thing they'd said about me, broadcast to the entire department. My team went pale, like genuinely lost all color in their faces. A few people stared at their laptops. Others looked at each other with this dawning horror. I sat there trying to keep my expression neutral while internally screaming. Richard announced mandatory sensitivity training for the entire team. A formal review of team dynamics, an investigation into workplace culture. Then he said that some personnel changes would be happening. 2 people were being transferred to different departments. The ringleader, the one who'd created the chat and contributed the most vicious comments, was being demoted. The meeting ended in uncomfortable silence. People filed out without making eye contact. Nobody said anything. The contrast to the weeks of gossip and whispers was almost funny. Almost. Richard pulled me aside afterward. He had this slight smile, the kind that suggested he'd enjoyed the chaos just a little bit. He said, and I'll never forget this, sometimes the best revenge is just staying quiet and letting people hang themselves. He was right. I hadn't done anything, hadn't retaliated, hadn't confronted anyone, hadn't even known what was happening. They'd destroyed themselves entirely on their own. All I did was exist while they built their own gallows. I bought Richard a coffee the next day as a thank you. We talked for a bit about the situation, about team management, about how he'd handled it. He was surprisingly cool about the whole thing. Said he'd seen this kind of behavior before, and it always ended badly for the people doing it. We connected on LinkedIn. I never expected to be LinkedIn friends with the CEO, but here we are. My team barely makes eye contact with me now. The few who weren't involved in the group chat have been overly nice, like they're trying to distance themselves from the ones who were. The ringleader left the company entirely about a month later. The 2 who got transferred requested it. Apparently couldn't handle staying on the team after everything came out. We have a new group chat now, an official one. Everyone's very professional, very careful. There's no banter, no jokes, nothing personal. Just work. It's functional, but it's dead inside. The irony is they destroyed the team culture they'd been trying to preserve without me. I don't know if they ever figured out exactly how Richard ended up in their private chat. Maybe they think someone snitched. Maybe they assume he has access to everything. Either way, nobody's creating secret group chats anymore. At least not ones with people whose last name is Chen. The whole thing taught me that sometimes karma doesn't need your help. Sometimes you just need to show up, do your job, and let other people's bad decisions catch up with them. Richard was right. The best revenge really is just staying quiet and watching people hang themselves with their own rope. And that's where we'll close tonight's collection of digital chaos and cosmic karma. If you've made it this far, you've survived texts to the wrong person, fake pregnancies, secret half-siblings, and the beautiful poetry of accidental justice. Remember, screenshots are forever, always check who you're texting, and never underestimate the power of a well-timed group chat mistake. Sweet dreams, everyone, and remember, the internet never forgets, but forgiveness is always an option. Hit subscribe if you want more stories that prove truth is stranger than fiction, and I'll see you in the next one. Sleep well, stay dramatic, and keep your receipts organized.